John Clarke, a social worker who assists whistleblowers, as well as Patrick Maduna, a whistleblower himself, join me to talk about this anniversary. And good morning to you both. I know that it's a sad day in some ways as well. And we had our reporting team outside Babita Deokaran's home, and you can see that the pain obviously is still very close and to the skin for their family members. But the only way that justice is achieved is if those who, beyond those, the killers themselves having been convicted and getting those sentences, those who masterminded all of this are brought to justice. And I'm wondering, maybe, John, we can kick off with you, as we heard from the SIU's Andy Motibe this morning, that the corruption networks at Tembisa Hospital seem to be far more exponential than what Babita was trying to, trying to blow the whistle on, that it might even extend to other hospitals across the country. When you hear things like this, even though it's 3 years later and we don't know who the masterminds are, her death was not in vain.
It wasn't. And I mean, Jeff Wicks, in his extraordinarily good investigating afterwards, made darn sure that he would continue the work that she started. And in Mandy Weiner's book, Whistleblowers, she produced an updated edition where she includes a chapter on Babita Deokaran, and she describes her as being an island in a sea of corruption. And it's wonderful that she stood proud, despite the fact that there was and often with a death, and this is really my experience as a social worker, all crises are latent opportunities. And what we have seen is a galvanizing of people to actually say, what sort of country do you want to live in? Do you want to live in a mafia state where people get away with this? No, what we have seen is a media rallying, and thanks to folk like yourself, we've managed to get it. I would like to have heard, Advocate Motibe acknowledge that, that the SIU can now justly say, good, we're making progress, but they would never have done it if it wasn't for the media and civil society and ordinary people who are just taking responsibility, who should, many of whom, be in witness protection themselves, as Babita should have. So there's an issue there. The fact that what she was disclosing and was such incendiary information, the SIU should have made sure she was in witness protection. And I have Patrick here today, who I believe also should be in witness protection, and he can tell you his story. But the essence of it is that we can roll back this mudslide and we make meaning out of what the tragedy of what Babita and her family had to experience.
And I think that's key. What you're saying is that there has to be some level of meaning. We have to feel a sense, not that it was worth it, because nothing can ever be worth the price tag of a life, but that it was worth it in the sense that her efforts were not fruitless. And I want to then bring it to you, Patrick. Maybe you can just share, just as an opening, how the developments in this case resonate for you as a whistleblower yourself.
Absolutely. So I think 2016, Barloworld and Shell and Avis came together. They created a BEE, so sort of an empowerment program, which I was included in, and I became a trustee, only to find that this is just a vehicle that was designed to defraud Shell, which I then made, protected disclosures to Shell South Africa, Shell Global, the Hawks, the BE Commission, as well as Lokiwe itself. Then I was retaliated. I got, a lot of charges. I went to disciplinaries until I was fired, and also took bullets. And as we speak, my car is a bullet hole at the back. So,
well, as John is saying, you should be in a protective program. You should be in some form of witness protection. We've seen the brutality and the risk that is attached to not being in such a program. How are you feeling when you think about your experience in relation to what happened to Babita?
Unfortunately, that's the reality. When you confront the powers, they retaliate, and this is their best way of retaliating.
Well, just to stay on that point for a second, because we don't want to have a conversation later on that more should have been done. John, who needs to be galvanized to make not only the recommendation in terms of Patrick's security a reality and come to fruition, but for others like Patrick, and we know that there are many. Mandy's written about them in her book, but we know in South African society that there are many people who are now exposed. First of all, they've lost their livelihoods. They've been outed, and they're vulnerable, as are their families, but they should be protected.
They should, and they should be not just their lives, but their livelihoods. But let's stay with the issue of their lives and their well-being and their safety. I mean, we've had to now go overseas to get funding to support Patrick and his family because he can't get a job. And we've had to duck and dive to make sure he's safe, move around to different locations so they don't know where he is. Now, 4 years after Mandy published her first edition of the book, we had assumed that the Protected Disclosures Act was just a kind of 6 months away of being totally overhauled, a far more effective agency established to ensure that what myself and others are doing as civil society volunteers often would be taken on as a state responsibility. It still have not had the overhaul of the PDA, and that is a mark of absolute shame. However, I always try
So whose door do we lay that at?
Well, on the state, because of course these criminal networks are so well sort of networked into basically retarding any movement, because blowing the whistle, and whistleblowers are the most effective way of actually getting to the heart of corruption, particularly in financial crimes.
So this is justice and constitutional development, right?
Exactly.
This should be
constitutional development, justice,
right.
Constitutional development.
Yeah.
And I had run-ins with the former Deputy Minister, John Jeffries, but I did talk to Songezo Zibi before the elections, and he said he was going to promise to mount a private members bill, and he has hoped that by the end of this year, he would have had a petition mounting with 1 million signatures to make sure that the PDA is overhauled. Now, Songezo, if you're watching, remember that promise you made. I know you've got other priorities, but I can't see a more important one if we're going to clean up the mess and if the government of national unity is to survive. Because that whole thing requires
political
honesty and truthfulness.
Yeah.
And if we have whistleblowers that we know can actually expose that, politicians will be deterred somewhat from basically trying their luck.
And I mean, we heard from Advocate Andy Motibe from the SIU this morning that there's an opportunity to have the proclamation, insofar as Tembisa Hospital is concerned, widened to include other hospitals across the country, because it sounds as if this is not an isolated incident. I mean, you think, Patrick, about just how sophisticated all of this seems to be. I mean, it was way more than Babita could ever have envisaged. I think the figures run into the billions, 3 billion. We're talking about more than 5,000 transactions, letterbox companies, trying to wash money and so on, that it becomes quite complex. From your vantage point, I mean, how different is it, when you're scratching the surface to the real rot that you're exposing underneath? Just talk to our viewers about how intentional and how sophisticated, in your experience, these networks are. This is their business, to take money.
Unfortunately, I think I'm actually saying unfortunately intentionally, because the corporate, they employ very, very educated people, very, very skilled people, and those who are in power, those who are given power to make the rules and govern, are the ones who are the most corrupt. But unfortunately, we are scapegoated in the process. So I feel we are very, very vulnerable to an extent that if you don't have people who will hold your hand, like John did to me, you can easily commit, suicide if you are not killed. The situation is very, very dire, and your family suffers, and you suffer, and everything around you suffers. If it wasn't for the Whistleblower House and the Freedom House in America, I think I would be in a very, very dire situation. I wouldn't be here as well.
And that's really sobering, Patrick, to hear you say that, because, we often write it in black and white, and that's often devoid of emotion. But the cost to a life, to a family, to your children, to your opportunities is massive. And so it's really, I think, heartening to hear that there is a network of support around people like yourselves. Let's continue talking with John Clarke, who's a social worker who assists whistleblowers, and also to Patrick Maduna, himself a whistleblower, on this 3rd anniversary of Babita Deokaran's assassination. So, John, it seems quite complex how sophisticated these corruption networks are becoming. When you look at this News 24 report on Tembisa Hospital and how it stands at the center of this complete extraction scheme, which relied on hospital officials who engineered the awarding of thousands of contracts. Apparently a dirty money laundering scheme happened on an industrial scale in what we see in the hospital. It may not be limited to this particular institution alone. Your reflections on how intentional and how deeply extractive these networks are?
Well, you know, I'm 68 the other day, and I thought I was going to retire at 65 and have a gentle downward slope. I've learned so much and so beneficial to me as a social worker with life experience to be able to now understand just how corruption and graft is so much at putting South Africa's democracy at risk. And what I've learned, one of the things is, a friend of mine calls it a thugocratic machine at work, where they deliberately have a process of co-optation of people in political influence and in officials to make sure that their interests are secured. They do a very clinical risk analysis, and they can see, and what they've identified, that whistleblowers are a big risk to that business. So that's why they retaliate against them. And so that's why I come back to that point. Why has it taken so long to get the PDA thing? What can we do in the absence of that? Well, we can use the media. And Imam, I have to say to you and others that that's what South Africa has going for us, that we will be retaliated against. I mean, Patrick and I, from having now made public his story, both of us are now facing defamation suits from the person that was fired by Shell because of the allegations.
And where is that now? Because I heard you in an earlier interview reference that and say, you know, luckily you've got great lawyers and people who are willing to work pro bono, and that you wouldn't raise your head above the parapet unless you were 100% sure about the claim or the accusation that you're making. That you have to have that. You have to have that backbone behind you.
We must have that backbone, and it's thanks to them. I mean, and there are wonderful lawyers who have actually see the law as an instrument for social justice and for pushing back that mudslide. Unfortunately, there are other lawyers who actually will very eagerly take advantage of the situation and are willing to represent all sorts of scoundrels in ways to actually get them to evade responsibility. Now that's, I mean, you know, constitutional justice has spoken out about this. It's something which the Chief Justice himself, retired Chief Justice, has said. So I think, as much as I'm saying that the media have done greatly, the legal profession needs to up their game, because it's and to start looking at the real purpose, normative purpose of what the law is supposed to be there, rather than simply making money out of this conflict.
Yeah. Patrick, when you hear, you know, what needs to happen, especially even from a legislative perspective, and John is talking about the PDA, the Public Disclosures Act, and so on. I'm just thinking, here you are, a guy who just wanted to be a businessman. You wanted to make an honest day's bread. You wanted to grow your company and your prospects, and live a quote-unquote, you know, normal life. Suddenly, you see something wrong, you say something, and then you do something about it. And now you're in this whole other sort of world where you're either on the run or you're worried about your family. You're contemplating, I mean, there's a very deep personal risk to yourself. And you also have to become familiar with the entire infrastructure that surrounds what you've just done, the law and so on. Did you ever think that it was going to lead to all of this? And I think it's a, you know, it's a cautionary tale maybe for other would-be whistleblowers. So why should they do it if they can see what's happened to you, what's happened to Babita?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Unfortunately, it's a very tough one, because if you come up and you speak the truth to powers, you're actually committing a career suicide, and it only gets tough with time. It doesn't get easy. So you should be sure of what you are doing, and you should get your facts right before you actually engage in this journey. You mentioned my family. I haven't seen my family. Like the last time I saw my family, they had to relocate to Cape Town, because my wife is from Cape Town. They had to actually, I saw them last year in August, and I only was able to see them this year in June, because John had to drive me from Joburg to my wife in Western Cape and come back just to make sure that I'm safe. after we got the funding from Freedom House. So
it's that bad, Patrick?
It's that bad from a financial point of view and psychological point of view and for my well-being. It's just bad. It's bad not just for me, also for the family.
Do you regret this?
Half of me does regret it, and half of me says, no, I did the right thing. I had to, because I also had, if you accept a position of employment, you also accept, the responsibility. So half of me, yes, half of me, no.
And in the bigger picture around your sense of self as a human being, as a moral, ethical, integrous person,
yes,
that seemed to have been more important to you than choosing the comfort of silence.
It's, I think my integrity actually is I told John a story. I was raised by my grandmother. She taught me that your values, are much better than other people's opinions and views, because your values is what molds you, is what defines you. So I decided to stick with my values.
I want to come back to you and get your thoughts on how you see all of all of this ending. But let's talk about the support that does exist, John, for people like Patrick who who want to do the right thing at great personal cost.
Well, the Whistleblower House has been established now. They're getting funding, and they've been wonderful. What Cynthia Stimple has done there.
She herself a
whistleblower of SAA. She's found a whole sense of meaning and purpose in her life, as have I. I mean, people ask me, why do I do what I do? I said, because I get people like Patrick and Cynthia and Mosila Matepu and, all the rest of them that I was privileged to meet. And it's given me a huge sense of saying, well, I can still make a contribution despite looking a bit like a stale, pale male. I can at least kind of extend my shelf life a bit, if I may use that, and actually make a contribution within my experience and my relative privilege. And I've been very conscious of the fact that, unfortunately, it shouldn't be that we have people like myself having to kind of get involved, because the system has not actually served to actually bring people like Patrick more to the surface of leadership and business and that. Instead, we've got the people that actually are only in there to seek their own interests, seeking power for their own wealth and self-interest. And I think that's a moment of truth for our nation. Are we at this threshold point? And I really do believe that even though things might still get a bit worse, they will get better. And that's what the benefit of 44 years of social work do tell me, that no matter how dark the night, the stars can still shine, and there are people that are coming forward. And that's the real test of integrity, is who's really there for you when the chips are down. And even though I've come around to realizing in counseling whistleblowers who come to me for help, I have to say to them, it's only going to get worse. And it shocks him a bit. And I said, but because the gist of my kind of intervention is to say, you are up against truth against power. The truth about power is that power has no defense against the truth. All it can do is retaliate and suppress it. So you're going to be attacked. So now we've got to make sure there are protective measures so that when they do go after you, they're not going to succeed, and they haven't. There's Patrick sitting here talking to you. It shows you in one case where they haven't succeeded.
And then you carry, Patrick, as a result, the will of everyone and the goodwill of everyone to be able to see this journey to fruition, and hopefully to maybe not return to a sense of normality, but actually have a deeper and more enriched life after all of this. And I don't know, do you think about an after all of this? So what's the next step for you?
I think I'm actually having a court date next year. Is it February at the Labour Court? I hope once and for all, I'll actually be in a position where I can get my life back, and then I can try and live like everyone, and probably the truth will then come out. Unfortunately, you would expect companies like Barloworld, like Shell, as well as Avis, okay, let me not say Avis, just say Lokiwe, to come forward and say, hey, we want to do the right thing, but they're not. Shell, I actually went to Shell and told Shell, I am defrauding you. I am the trustee of Lokiwe. I am defrauding you. But they never opened a case to date. Nothing. So you would expect, according to our South African law, if there is any fraudulent activities within a company that exceeds 100,000, they actually need to open a case. But in this regard, Shell has done nothing. So that shows you and tells you that they are not willing to come to assist in the investigation and find the truth and have meaning in this whole situation. So you are isolated, you're just by yourself. If you don't have people who are supporting pillars like John, and fortunately I also have lawyers, which is the Harry Lupets and Molebatzis law firm, who are helping me pro bono. If you don't have that support structure, then you're just on your own.
You've had many, many days, many, many hours, Patrick, to think about all of these things, and you must have some theories as to why big companies, in this case, you mentioned Shell particularly,
yes,
didn't want to do anything or open up cases. Why do you think that is? What is your theory?
I think there's deep rot in these companies. I think Shell brought Ian Scott, who is a VP, Shell VP from Global, to come to South Africa last year in June. We were hoping that he's going to shake up things. He has, and he's gotten rid of a lot of rotten people within Shell. But when it comes to assisting and opening this case, because he was very, very adamant when he first came to South Africa to say this, he is willing to force Shell to participate. I think after digging deep, he discovered there is a lot of rot, and that would probably compromise Shell as a business in some other things, because I really don't have an answer and a reason why Shell wouldn't open a case and participate in this, because in a lot of information I've given to Shell about its own employees, most of them have resigned, some of them have been fired, and some resigned before they could be taken to disciplinary.
Obviously, we have to, as good media practitioners, offer again a right of reply to both of the companies, Barloworld and Shell, that you mentioned there. But just to close, and you know, we've heard again the personal cost. We've heard John, the prognosis, or what awaits people who are going to blow the whistle. But certainly, you have to have something special in you. There has to be, you know, a superseding force beyond the risk to your own comforts and your livelihood and so on. And it seems to be the love of country. It seems to be the love of wanting to do the right thing. As the family, Babita Deokaran's family, and we saw them this morning, our reporting team were in the field, Naledi was there with the family watching them lay the wreath. And you see, again, just in really poignant ways, the real impact and the cost to a family. What do you want to say to them? I know that the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, Outer, and many others have kind of rallied around them and provided that support together with members of the community. But, you know, what are your thoughts on this day, this third-year anniversary?
Well, what I can say is that I'm encouraged by the same pattern that seems to repeat itself when people go through serious tragedy in their lives. We so often want it to make sense, but it doesn't seem to make sense. But one of the whistleblower, friends of mine, Tiro Holele, he suddenly came to the insight, which I share now with other people. He says, when I find meaning in what it does, in what's happening, then it suddenly makes sense. So we try and make sense in order to make meaning. I'm saying find a way of making meaning, and that's what they are doing. And they're inviting us to all participate as civil society, as people who just are ordinary citizens who want to make this country work. We're all going to die. And it's important that how we live. And focus on that. Babita lived her life as a role model for others. The fact that they killed her is, in a sense, proof, and it only serves to affirm her as being the sorts of role model we want. And I would just hope that those who were responsible for this, behind the scenes, would also say, what sort of life are you leading? What sort of legacy are you leaving behind for your children? I want to tweak their consciences and say it's not sustainable, because ultimately the truth, and I really say this in conviction, does set you free, even though it's going to initially make you miserable.
Thank you to both of you. Patrick, thank you for sharing so honestly, and I do hope that, you know, there is a world and a time in which everything is resolved and you're able to be reunited with your family in the way that you are supposed to be, and that your prospects for your life and your livelihood improve over time.